Welcome to another Vegan Interactions Live. I'm thrilled to be joined by a special guest here, Chris, who we met through a comment thread, actually of one of my videos on Facebook. And in the next hour or so, we're basically going to be talking about the why and how I think of veganism and animal rights, plus just general making the world better type concepts. But yeah, we don't really have any script, so we're just going to kind of see how the conversation goes. So with that, Chris, welcome to the
Thank
show.
you.
And I guess I'm most interested. I saw on your profile about the Woeigo initiative. So maybe if you could just tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So WeGo Initiative was essentially started because I found out about the discrepancy between how much food we produce and how much food we consume, or how much food waste there is, and the fact that there's still hungry people, which led me on an adventure of discovering how inefficient a lot of charities are. And it's not necessarily their fault. There's just a lot of problems and expenses that they have to deal with. So WeGo became a platform to allow anybody to donate whatever they have: time, resource, money, expertise, to whatever project they want. So everything's actually linked to a project basis, and as a consequence, everything is streamlined, and we remove a lot of the problems or hiccups that people usually have when it comes to making the world a better place. So that's essentially what Woeigo is. We partner with school districts, we partner with charities, we partner with businesses, because we can help business turn their marketing budget into a donation budget and get the same kind of reward, and actually engage their employees better, engage the market space better, and overall make the world a better place out of money they'd usually just spend on paid ads, and get more reach out of it too.
Yeah, and on an individual basis, I'm hoping I'm remembering the right thing here, but it seemed like there's also a platform to kind of connect people with their passion. Is
Correct, exactly.
that's a big part of it too?
That's a huge part of it, because like there's a particular thing that everybody will care about. Like somebody may have had a family member affected by a particular disease, or someone may have been uniquely impacted by maybe a particular species going extinct. Whatever it is, there'll be a unique project, because that's how humans solve problems. We come together in teams with a defined goal and a set of steps to reach that goal, and we contribute towards reaching that goal together. It's always a project-based kind of mentality that gets us there. So by breaking everything down into projects, a single person can participate in multiple projects. A company or a not-for-profit can be involved or host multiple projects. But actually having that structured, using project management essentially, we can begin to resolve a lot of those inefficiencies, then also build automations and tool sets to extend the reach of people's time and resources.
Yeah, that's massive because especially like with any big movement, it can seem overwhelming to an individual, but if you can kind of piecemeal and kind of everybody has their part to focus on, obviously that can build into bigger things. And just a real quick hello to everyone that's joined us. We've got Vegan Vacancy, Deb, who actually we might be having a similar chat in the coming weeks. So great to see you here. And Deb, Tom, Amber, Roger, Kristen, Nella, Wendy, stupid vegan, interesting name, Maz the Gob.
I might not be a vegan, but I don't call any vegans stupid.
Yeah, presumably that's satire. I don't know. I guess we'll see.
Sure. Oh.
But yeah, I mean, I guess maybe a nice way to start things off would be, and we can, I think these themes of kind of breaking down like big goals will come throughout the discussion. But yeah, I mean, I guess maybe you could explore a little bit more, like, because I guess I'm looking, I can actually pull up the Facebook. There's the Facebook thread here I have, or sorry, the banner. So it looks like you talk about the environment, humanitarian, and also animal welfare.
Yep. So essentially there's three core pillars in my belief system. And I was like, I think these kind of encapsulate everything that we can do. There's like the environment, there's humans, because ourselves, we should care about ourselves. And then there's animals, like our neighbors, our friends. So we share this planet. Thankfully, we're not completely alone in the universe. We have animals on our planet, which is great. Even if we're not so respectful all the time, we have the capacity to be incredibly kind, compassionate, and respectful. And then environment is, we all live here, right? That's actually taking care of the environment in which we live. Humans are really good at manufacturing our environments and changing our environments, which have made us very comfortable, which is great. I'm a huge fan. I'm indoors right now, right? But then also humanitarian efforts. So by taking those three pillars, we can kind of fit pretty much everything in the doing good space into one of those pillars. So yeah, that's how we've broken it up on the platform, color coded it, that lovely stuff.
Yeah, it sounds like a brilliant idea. I'm certainly interested to see how that develops. Because when did you launch that? Is it a fairly recent?
I have launched and relaunched this app a couple times. First time launched it, but it was like early university, so people just kind of fell out. Everybody focused on their studies, understandably. And then second time we launched it towards the end of university, but had a different set of staff. And then I had like a takeover attempt where people tried to take it over and turn it into a pure profit engine, which was very upsetting. And I had to,
Okay.
yeah, as lawsuits, and that kind of shut the whole app down for about 2 years while those lawsuits came to an end. But I've never given up on Woeigo. Like we had this baseline of stuff in there. It is my baby. It's not my most, it doesn't generate income for me at the point. Like I got income through my semiconductor company, through my trading company, through my agency. But this is just a passion project that I will not let die because I think it's necessary. Nothing's fixed the problem yet in the market space. And it's been almost a decade since this project first started. So it's just a matter of, I will rebuild this team as many times as necessary. And we will at some point end up fixing this problem. But yeah, it's something really near and dear, close to home for me. Like we've kept everything active so people can still sign up, people can still engage. But in terms of the actual growth of the platform, it has lagged significantly because it's a one-man show at the moment, which is not viable.
Yeah. Oh, it's really nice to hear that though. Just like not letting it die, as you say, like because I think when we have that why factor or that passion, like there can be so many obstacles, which it sounds like you've had a fair few of already. But like if we just keep at it, like sometimes we don't know where we're going, but we know we need to get there, kind of thing.
Exactly. I think relentless effort towards something, if you're really passionate about something, there is no giving up unless I'm dead, essentially, right?
Well, we have confirmation from Stupid Vegan that it's meant to be lighthearted and catch people's attention, particularly anti-vegans. And Vegan Vacancy has just said, Stupid Vegan, great name. So we have a little bit of playfulness in the chat already. So that's great to see.
I'm glad. I'm really glad to hear it, actually. I was like, oh, wow, that's not good. This satire is way better.
Well, and Tom's got a question about how we connected, which I think we can go into a little bit of detail here with. But what I'd like to do is just play a very short 60-second video that it's non-graphic, but just basically kind of frames the conversation, I think.
Yeah.
And then maybe we can get into it from there.
Sounds good to me.
All right.
The philosophy of animal rights is on the side of reason, for it is not rational to discriminate arbitrarily. And discrimination against non-human animals is demonstrably arbitrary. The other animals humans eat, use in science, hunt, trap, and exploit in a variety of other ways have a life of their own that is of importance to them apart from their utility to us. They are not only in the world, they are aware of it and also of what happens to them. The philosophy of animal rights stands for, not against, justice. We are not to violate the rights of the few so that the many might benefit. This philosophy, therefore, is a philosophy of peace, but it is a philosophy that extends the demand for peace beyond the boundaries of our species. To stand truly for peace is to stand firmly against their ruthless exploitation.
Respect other animals and their rights. Live vegan.
It's a good video.
Get a little snippet of Dave the Goat. That's from they're from our local sanctuary. And there's just one time one of the volunteers was scratching his back, and he was just so happy, and he was talking, making the little cute noises that goats do. And yeah, just now he's at the end of all the videos I do. So
Very good. I like it.
But yeah, so to
it makes
answer
you feel
Tom,
kind of like it because I think a lot of people inherently know, like if you look at just the experience of being alive, human experience or animal experience, there's like this even for predators, they don't usually want to kill a baby, for instance. Like I found that fascinating. But then for instance, we eat like lamb, which is literally baby sheep. We have names for baby cow as well, which I think is veal, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong.
Yep.
So like that kind of stuff is a little bit messed up, I'm not gonna lie. But on the same note, like I still eat meat. I'm gonna probably keep eating meat until the alternatives are like there in health terms and taste terms. Like, I like my food. I'm not gonna lie. I do like tasty food. And I also did try going vegan. I think I mentioned in our Facebook chat. I was lethargic. My energy levels fell through the floor. I didn't try being like full vegan. I went like vegetarian. I kept like some things, but I'm also lactose. So this doesn't leave me many options. It's not like I'm going to drink milk. I've never really drank milk. Cheese I like though. Cheese I will not give up. That's worth the sacrifice for cheese.
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess. So, how long ago was it that you kind of tried veganism?
I tried.
Or, sorry, vegetarianism.
Yeah, vegetarianism,
Yeah.
and then like kind of began slowly becoming vegan just because I just didn't. It was very much the same thing. It wasn't strict though. It was more so just what I was eating just happened to be such. I tried this about 4 years ago for about a year, and so essentially like from like 2016 to 2017. Then end of 2017, I just gave up. I just had a steak dinner, and I felt so good the next day. It was amazing. I actually felt good within probably like 3 hours of having that dinner, and it changed my energy level significantly, changed my mood significantly. And I've never really known why, but yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes in. The human body's a complicated organism, isn't it? So
Yes, unfortunately.
So I guess that was actually a few years ago. So I mean, was it like the environmental side, the or you know the animals themselves, or was it more kind of initially health side of things? Was there any particular draw?
Combination of all of it, to be honest. So like I met a gentleman who was like in his 70s and still had all the color in his hair and still had like full hair and looked really young. Like he looked like he was late 30s, early 40s, and this guy's like 70 years old. And it's like, hey, that's insane. And he was a vegan. He was very big on veganism. Super smart, astute, high energy guy. And I was like, hey, you have more energy and you're like more than twice my age. You're like 3 times my age. I gotta figure out what's going on here. So I learned about it and I became more interested in it. And then as I learned more and more, the ethical arguments became really profound to me, because like I wouldn't eat, like I had a pet dog. I wouldn't eat my pet dog. I wouldn't eat like any pet. I killed like a lobster one time because I was making fresh lobster, and then I couldn't eat lobster for a few years. Bob was his name. Named that lobster.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, which was a horrible idea, because if you're going to eat something, don't name it. That's something I learned. It messes with you. Yeah, I tried crab fishing, caught some crabs, and then I couldn't eat crab for a long time. And that's like crustaceans. Those are simpler life forms as we view them, right? When you get to like pigs are intelligent. Cows, pretty intelligent. No, I'd say pigs are more intelligent. I could be completely wrong. This is guesstimation, relaying things I've heard in the past. But yeah, that's kind of messed up. But I do like steak and I do like bacon. So it's kind of like, how do we deal with this? And I also like, like part of the idea as well that I think is interesting is when you get to like Aboriginals or First Nations in North America, there's this huge amount of respect which goes into like a kill or something like that before consuming the food, where there's appreciation and respect for the offering that they're being given, or the life that is being taken, or something along those lines. And I think that's like that helps me deal with it, I guess, because it makes me feel less guilty. But on the same note, like I know like my energy did tank. And then I've also found out that there's like a hormone that we have as men, and in our 30s, it starts to fade out. And that's what allows us to break down red meat. But then that's still like, what about chicken? So I guess I can still eat chicken throughout, like seafood throughout. I'm not too sure. But it is a tricky problem. And I currently am eating meat. Like I've reduced my meat intake. I used to eat like, I could go all day and eat nothing but meat, specifically red meat. But I stopped doing that, and I kept reducing meat until eventually it was out of my diet. Once it was out of my diet, I just stayed that way for a while, and then progressively removed animal products by chance, more so than anything else, just because I didn't like them. And then, yeah, eventually had like a steak dinner one night, and I was like, oh my goodness gracious, this is great. I've been missing out. And now I'm back to my usual ways. Like I just had a beef pho the other night for dinner, or pho. which was delicious and amazing and nutritious and makes me feel good.
Yeah, so yeah, I think there's a few things there to explore. And honestly, I'm really thankful for you to be open to having a discussion, because I enjoy chatting about this stuff too, because I know before we went live, I know I grappled with this for the first 32 years of my life. I supported animal use, so yeah, it's obviously similar to you were talking about Woeigo. It's a passion project of mine in a way. But I guess when we look at like sensations, you mentioned taste being a strong one. I think that's quite common for a lot of people. I guess the one thing I would ask is, like, if I were like on the flip side of it, the conversation was flipped, and I was saying, like, I really like hearing animals scream as they're being killed. Like, I really like the way they sound. What would you, I guess, think about the kind of moral judgment of me saying,
It's a good
like,
question.
oh,
It's a really good framing question, actually, because I'm like, well, that sounds like you're psychotic. And I'm almost like, if I were saying, like, if human tasted good, that would sound psychotic too. Like, because as soon as you say screaming, I start thinking of like humans and such. So I got that relationship there. And then, yeah, that sounds messed up too. I don't like the screaming. Like, the flavor is good, but that sounds so messed up. Yeah. That's a good frame.
yeah, and honestly, like I say, I mean, I have grappled with this for the first 3 decades of my life, so it's not something, it's somewhat new to me in a way. So there's I try to remove judgment from these things and kind of just explore it, as two humans trying to grapple with these complicated topics, because there is a lot of cultural speciesism. I'm not sure during your kind of research of this if you've come across the term speciesism much.
Yeah, well, I'd say that a good example of that is like dogs, right? Like in the Western world, a dog is a pet. You do not eat a dog. But like elsewhere, that might not be the case. Same as like a pig isn't really a pet in the West for the most part. Although the people who end up having pigs as pets, usually don't like bacon as much anymore.
Well, and that's a fascinating thing for me, because a little bit more about my kind of progression. I mean, I was vegetarian and pescatarian for 12 years before I started living vegan. So it was I mean, some people I think are more kind of direct cutover, whereas others kind of do a more gradual thing. And I had a similar experience. I like literally was going species by species in a way, like, who can I get away with, eating or using? And it took a while. But I think you're right. You mentioned dogs, because I think there's still a lot of way dogs are used. I mean, I'm in the UK. We have a so-called racetrack just a few miles from me. So they're forced to race. They're tested on. Beagles, like 3,000 a year in this country are tested on, which that's obviously, I think, something that kind of challenges a lot of people, but yet we still do it. So there is kind of this phased approach, but you're right. Like, most people do respect them as members
sentience.
of the family, adopted. Yeah, well, yeah, sentience. You're right. Well, it's an interesting one. I mean, so where would you draw the line? I guess if you had to, like, I mean, if we're looking at all animals, has that been part of the process, or is it just kind of animals and animal? So to speak?
Animals and animal excess of it, and like the types of recipes and such that are in it. Like, I personally could not eat dog. I know I couldn't eat dog. I couldn't eat cat. But as long as I can keep myself relatively removed from the realization of what an animal is, like, I don't have any relationship with a pig or a cow or anything. Like, I maybe pet one once in my youth as a child, and I don't even remember it. Which can allow me to detach from it much more easily, and that makes it easy to just view it as food. So that is nifty. I don't know if you can necessarily draw a line, because as soon as you start trying to draw a line and you're like, okay, well, this animal's on one side of the line because of these reasons, like, this is food, this is not food. As soon as you start doing that and to kind of come to these conclusions, you're going to end up very quickly wanting to move your line all the way, because there is, like, we tend to be arrogant and be like, oh, humans are super intelligent, nothing else has any intelligence. But I don't know, like, dolphins have more advanced language than any humans. Elephants remember better than any humans. So there's like a whole bunch of these things which we're discovering, and we're like, ooh. I don't know if you can just draw lines. Like my current line is like, okay, well, pig and cow and chicken are common food groups at the moment. Those are okay to eat.
And that's kind of what culture teaches us, isn't it? I mean, it's such a fascinating thing, because it's like, that's to me part of the like beautiful mystery of like, if we want to use a terminology like animal rights, because I don't think we'll ever know some of those questions. I mean, you mentioned dolphins and their language. I think that's so cool that like, that's actually something I'm not very familiar with myself, although I've, brushed with the topic. But I mean, that begs the question, should we value someone morally or not, depending on their cognitive abilities?
Valuing life based on cognitive ability, that is a tricky question. I don't know if you could get away with that. Otherwise, you're going to have like euthanasia becoming very popular among the human species, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, like, there's pro-population arguments and pro-depopulation arguments. So,
well, yeah. Yeah, I'm actually in the process of setting up a live stream, I think, around the topic of antinatalism, which that's a whole nother can of worms to liberate. But is that topic you've kind of touched on at all yourself, or you just mentioned kind of? Well, it's kind of, the reason I bring it up is it relates to your point around population growth, because it's basically just encouraging us to ask the question of the morality of creating human life, which I've only recently come across, but it ties in with, obviously breeding our fellow animals to be eventually used and killed.
Yeah.
So that's,
yeah.
That
makes a lot of sense. Yeah, because if you have a single person, let's say they eat like I do, they're going through probably over 100 cows in their lifetime, maybe 2, not to mention all the other animals that they're going through. And you definitely come down to a serious ethical quandary in that situation. Because if we could reduce the human population reasonably, but I'm also a really big supporter, and like, I think we could probably support about 14 to 15 billion people on the planet without too much trouble. And then it's also a good idea to have like extra people, because if you think about how humans are, we're going to settle Mars at some point. That's like not an if, but when kind of thing, in my personal opinion, unless we kill ourselves before then. But you're going to probably
likely, yeah.
I don't know.
Well, yeah, no, what I
but you're going to need like 1 billion people to send to Mars just to start that seeding process, because it's going to be a much more stressful life. So I imagine birth rates and fertility rates are going to be much lower under those conditions, because you're also going to have a much more educated populations going out there, and you do have like that correlation between education and birth rates. As education goes up in any country, the birth rate goes down. That's why, like, in pretty much all of the developed nations, you got population decline, right? So I don't know if we need to worry about it too much. It seems to be like naturally occurring that we will balance our population out and just stop breeding. There's a really interesting TED talk that discussed kind of population and where it's going and where we're going to kind of like cap out. And I think he was saying something along the lines of like, we'd hit 12.5 billion people, and then everybody would be developed enough for birth rate to kind of just like begin teetering off slightly, and then we'd find like our sweet spot. So it's like anything, like we're on this big growth spurt right now, and then at some point we're going to hit our limit, and then we'll start pulling back a little bit, and we'll just find our equilibrium, and at some point we should balance out, I hope. Or maybe we'll just gradually just not breed ourselves out of existence, which I don't know.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, it's a tricky one, because, well, I think it was before we started, you were talking about how we actually produce twice the amount of food that we actually need to feed the world.
Yeah.
So I guess I've got my own thoughts, but putting the question to you first, where's the extra food going, I guess?
Waste. A lot of it goes to waste, and that's only the documented waste, which will not include like at-home food scraps, for instance. So like leaving food on your plate, things like that, or letting food go bad at home, things like that. But like grocery waste and supply chain waste. So essentially, if we spoil a carton because it isn't refrigerated, it should have been refrigerated or something along those lines. If something in that supply chain process breaks down, we get food waste. That's recorded and documented very well at the moment. But I also think about just food waste in general. I'm like, for most people, when they hear food waste, they don't even think about that stuff. That doesn't exist to them. So our food waste is actually probably much higher than what we think it is. But yeah, that's how that number is defined. That's how that comes about. That's how we figure that out.
Yeah, because one of the big stats that I think there's only like 2 or 3 really that I keep coming back to myself, and one of the big ones is feed conversion ratios. And the big thing I was shocked to learn is that it takes 2 to 20 times the amount of calories to filter plants through our fellow animals versus eating the plants directly. And a lot of that is coming from the countries who need calories the most. So I think on top, but that's even before the kind of food waste you're talking about, because it's already been kind of produced to be wasted.
Exactly.
Guess,
Yeah.
so.
That's it's another layer of waste. And if you think about that, all of a sudden our food waste, if you think in that term, like that frame, I think you could argue that our food waste is many, many, many times higher than what it is. Because if we're burning, say, 10 or 20 times the volume of food per calorie in terms on 1 calorie of meat versus like 20 calories or 10 calories of corn or some sort of grain, because I think most of that stuff is grain, if I'm not mistaken. Most animal feed is grain. So yeah, that does get tricky.
Yeah, they basically. I mean, there's a lot of intricacies around that, but because I mean, I guess something that I think definitely unites our passions is the humanitarian side of like human starvation. It's what 25,000 humans die each and every day. So like just in the time we're having this talk, that's like 1,000 humans. And it's like, so the big question is first why, and then how do we address that?
Yeah, and the why is mostly just human incompetence. I wouldn't say greed necessarily, but it's just like poor economic management. Like we don't have a way for a lot of people to get access to basic needs, even though we're in an incredibly sophisticated and modern time where we'd actually boost the economy by getting more of these people engaged and taken care of than we would see cost to doing so. So, yeah, I don't know.
Do you think if more humans, the dietary aspect of veganism, ate vegan, do you think that would help?
Maybe from a moral point of view, from like a fundamental like resource point of view, I don't think it would cause any difference, just because we have the resource at the moment. The resource is there. It's literally just a matter of like, we just don't provide access to the resource. We'd much rather at the moment waste the food than give it away for free. And I can understand the psychological aspect of like, you need to earn your keep and things like that. But I also think, especially with the looming era of full automation, which is going to be like this goal that's consistently out of reach, but we're constantly striving towards, we're going to need like a UBI or something. And I think to just make sure everybody has, like just to implement a basic UBI ASAP and making sure everybody has access to banking and food and things like that. Because there's also a tremendous proportion of the population which is unbanked and undocumented and things like this, which also seems kind of ludicrous to me. Like if someone doesn't want to participate, I think that's up to them. That's fair, but they should still be allowed to access food, you know, like access housing. It doesn't have to be amazing food, doesn't have to be 5-star chef, like anything like that. Just that's sustenance, right? I think having access to sustenance and shelter, like, have you heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Yep.
Okay, I'm a big fan of like the bottom 3 layers. We have all the resources and benefit to provide. If we provide those bottom 3 layers to everybody equally, I think everyone would be doing better. Oh, I just got a low battery remark here. Let me just
feel free to plug in, and I'll actually pull up the Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
That would be great. If
while you do that?
Yes, one moment. I apologize.
Yeah, no worries. Take your time.
Thank you.
And just for everyone else, I am keeping an eye on the comments, so we'll bring those in as we can, but obviously focusing on the conversation at the moment. But yeah, hopefully everyone's enjoying the chat so far. I think we'll keep things going for a wee bit longer once Chris gets charged up. If you do know anyone who's either a fellow animal advocate or maybe a bit vegan curious, the best way to get these chats out there is to just message it to someone. So my guess is there's a lot of us that are, with the impending apocalypse, probably home at the moment anyway. So it's a great way for us to connect, and hopefully we can all, think about these topics a little bit further.
All right, I am back. How to plug this all in and I'll keep my stuff as it is. Otherwise, I might have to move.
Yeah, I'm getting a little bit of audio, just not video.
Yeah, I'm running around the room. Give me one moment. My problem
Yeah,
is my
you're good.
plug's on the other side. Yeah.
Sounds good. Don't get tangled in an extension cord or anything.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out. Yeah. 1 second. We're gonna turn off my video for a second again.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, so I'm just catching up on the comments. It's obviously, I think for those of us who do these live streams know it's difficult to follow both threads. I mean, I think to Wendy's point, talking about the environment and animal welfare whilst consuming other animals, and then being entangled, I think we will kind of work to that. But yeah, just kind of framing things at the moment. So yeah, I guess maybe if you're listening in, maybe if there's anything that you would like to hear more about, I've got a few things myself, but we are going to get to the other aspects of this topic. I promise. So. Yeah, and hello, Mark. How are you doing? Maslow's hierarchy needs applies to all sentient beings, or at least it should be seen to. And I think I can just go ahead and pull that up a little bit. What we were talking about there, talking about these basic needs, and this is actually an interesting. I haven't really thought about this before, but no better place to think out loud than on a live stream, right? But I think there's a lot of overlap between the theory of Maslow's hierarchy as well as with animal rights, because I think one thing that's often said about animal rights is that it's kind of assumed that other animals are meant to have the same rights as humans, which isn't necessarily the case. We're really just talking about those basic moral rights. And for me, that the fundamental right is to be respected and not to be bred, used, or killed, which if we're looking at this chart here, I mean, basic needs, they at least have framed for the bottom two layers. So I'm going to have to reflect on this a little bit more to see, how it works in. I don't know if anybody's watching who's quite familiar with the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Do let us know if you thought about the relationship it has with veganism or animal rights. I'd be quite curious because I'm working through this myself, as you can tell live. We're just going to give Chris a moment. I think he's getting a battery charger for his laptop. I'm going to have a skim through the comments, but if I have missed anything that you'd like me to talk about now while we have a moment, feel free to drop it at the bottom of the comments. I will try to look through, but there has been a lot here, so it's great to see some chat in the in the comments too, because I think these things are just a catalyst, because I know it's a big thing, I think, to approach some of these issues that we've literally grown up our whole lives with, and try to unpack them. So that's what, I think for a lot of us, I know I've missed doing outreach on the street quite a lot for a multitude of reasons. It's a good place to try out new ideas, but it's also one of the more hands-on thing versus just publishing a video that goes out and rarely get any feedback necessarily of saying all this had this impact. Whereas on a live conversation basis, you can kind of do that. So this is basically the 2021 pandemic version of street outreach, I guess. But obviously there's some technology things to overcome as well. I appreciate how the conversations can go all kinds of different directions, but that's a fun thing about I guess exploring these complex ideas, because Chris and I, this is our literally before a short meeting. This is our first time interacting besides a few Facebook comments, so it's a bit of good fun here. So looks like you're back with us, Chris. How are you doing?
I've had to reposition myself a little bit here in order to get close to the plug, but we're good. Sorry about the interruption there.
No, you're golden. You're golden. It gave me a chance to catch up on some stuff too, so that's good.
I'm glad.
But yeah, I don't know if you could hear while you're reloading. Possibly not if you're restarting and stuff. But looking at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I think there's some interesting overlap between the bottom two layers and actually the idea of animal rights.
I would agree
Because
entirely. Very much so.
I mean, that's a big question. I think to me that kind of underpins this discussion is, I mean, do you think when we use our fellow animals, we violate their rights?
Well, I mean, we also provide them in a certain way because nature is mean. We forget that a lot in our modern world. Nature is harsh and mean. And thanks to like our dependence, our coexistence with certain animals, we provide their physiological and safety needs to an extent that's beyond what they'd usually get in nature. But then we also pull back, whereas like some animals would have perfect safety all the time. Like they might not be perfectly safe from predators or other like weather, what have you. They have like as a standard overall a much higher level. So I think like we do have humanity to what we do to an extent, but then it's of course not perfect because at the end of the day, when you go and you murder an animal, slaughter an animal, you are removing any sense of safety or security that it had up until that point. Even if it's gotten to it's lived its like 50%, 80%, 100% of its life, whatever. I think we do, for the most part, do pretty well. There are some serious issues with industrial farming that we do not get right, where we do not take care of physiological needs, we do not take care of safety needs, and a lot of the time people see that stuff now, but then it's also being projected onto the entire industry, and then when it comes to the consumption, a lot of people don't necessarily think about those things necessarily, which I could think could be a problem. And I think having just a transparent process on that would probably at least make people understand a bit more where we could be doing better, because I don't think anybody wants animals to actually suffer. I have not met a person yet who just wants needless suffering. Even if they want to eat the animal, they don't want the animal to have a miserable life up until that point. Like I would prefer my animal to have a great life up until that point. And I would imagine most people are like mind, or I would hope most people are of like mind.
Well, I think honestly, a lot of stuff is coming out that I think is really indicative of wider society. Because I would agree with you. Most humans, I think, would oppose suffering of our fellow animals. And I guess for me, I don't actually come at it from a suffering angle, because to me, even if we reduce the suffering, you know, we've got 2 dogs here that we share a home with. Even if we could kill them in a way that they didn't suffer at all, in quotes, and then we use their body for, let's say, you know, beyond the dietary aspects, beyond eating them, we use their hair, you know, for fashion, which they do, you know, Canada Goose jackets and all that stuff, or entertainment, you know, that maybe we test on their bodies, but we're still killing them. We're violating their right to life. Like, to me, how it's done is less important than the fundamental wrong. And for the animals who aren't here, you know, the breeding in the first place is where I would kind of put my line down. Like, why are we breeding them into existence in the first place? Would be my question. That to me is the moral question, regardless of what happens after that point.
That makes sense.
But I guess there's a lot in this. Are we talking about animals who are already here, free living beings, or are we talking about, you know, we talked about industrialized farming, or so-called, you know, in quotes, food animals?
Yeah.
I mean, do you think they lead a net positive life or a net negative life if we were to focus in on that one aspect of animal use?
If we were to take in the total volume of populations, relative to like in nature, I think it is marginally net positive. There are a few outliers where it's like they really, really drag down the average, where you can have absolutely horrendous living conditions. Like, for instance, I don't remember the exact name of this farming methodology, but I remember hearing that they changed the regulations around how to farm chickens, where you're allowed to have like less space per chicken, and they're just like all stacked in cages, and they have like no space whatsoever to move or anything. And you could, like, the chickens on the bottom cages, from what I understand, would have like essentially just fecal matter building up on them from the chickens above them. Their feet would get damaged from standing in the cages without very much space, and not on exactly natural surfaces, right?
Yeah. So
like in those situations, they really, really, really bring down the average. And then I think the other side of that is that you should, thinking about it in a statistical way like that, even be acceptable, because kind of like when you think about the death sentence, our moral point on that is if one innocent person is killed, it's not worth it. And I think that is very true. I think like if we have like that kind of frame of reference on things, we might not ever be perfect. We might not ever get things to be 100%. I don't think it's possible to necessarily get things 100%, but I think we get a lot closer. I think we can do a lot better job of it. So I think in terms of the animal Maslow's hierarchy of needs situation, that a lot of the animals are better off than they would be in nature just on their own. But definitely not all of them. And the ones that are really nowhere near what they would be in nature really do impact the overall situation significantly in a bad way.
Okay, so I guess looking at like better off in nature, what about not being bred in the first place?
I mean, like, you get into some very, very existential, philosophical kind of situations where life is suffering, right?
Well, for our fellow animals who are breeding to be used and killed, or I actually really like how you said the word murder, because I'm glad we can agree on that, because really, what's the difference other than their species? You know, if someone's purpose is to be used and then murdered, I mean, even the video we connected on with my sister's rescue chickens, if she, you know, set whatever date in the calendar, right? Whether it's, you know, the average industry standard or whatever, 42 days, or it's 4.5 years. I mean, if she were to go and kill them just to consume their bodies,
Premeditated.
would it matter? Would it? Yeah, there's that. I mean, would it matter how she does it, or would it just be a moral wrong in the first place?
I think it very much matters how you do it. Like, for instance, I'm not opposed to human euthanasia. I think it is beneficial. I think it's dangerous because, like, for instance, you get down to the problem of like, oh, we can save 8 people if we kill this one person by harvesting their organs. Like, I would find that wrong. But then on the other side, if I want to die, if I am miserable and in pain, and I'm like, please, for the love of God, kill me, I would much rather a doctor be like, here's a little injection. We can still harvest your organs and everything's going to be great. We can maximize the good here. Versus them being like, nope, not allowed to do it. And I'm like, all right, cool. I'm going to go jump off a 4-story building or something and then maybe not die. Which would suck.
I guess the main difference there being consent, because our fellow animals aren't asking. Oftentimes they're not in a state where they, you know, need to be killed, which is obviously a whole different topic assessing that, but they're oftentimes, you know, healthy and they're not consenting. Whereas in euthanasia, it's someone who is not healthy and actually asking to be, well, obviously depending.
Yeah, I think
know.
consent is a big one. I think the thing is we can manufacture consent in people, which we have. That's how the whole like political spectrum fallacy is where it is today, where you just kind of like you shape people's perspective on reality, and you do this by sometimes changing the definitions of words, sometimes just providing a very narrow subsect of data to people. So like you can manufacture consent in people. You could probably do the same thing in animals as well. Like if we could communicate with animals perfectly and explain to them our situation where it's like, hey, look, here's the deal. We will take care of you and your kin, give you great life, but at a certain age, we want to eat you. I mean,
Yeah.
it could be like in theory an okay situation, but like, I guess like ultimately,
would there be though?
I don't know, actually. Like I was saying that, I was like, ultimately, I think like what we need to get to, and what I'm a fan of is the idea. Like it sounds kind of gross, I guess, relative to what we're used to at the moment. But like, I really like the idea of like printed steaks. I can have this appliance sitting on my counter with like it's like inkjet cartridge filled with cells. And he's like, I want A4 Wagyu steak with 30% marbling. Just click my buttons.
Star Trek style. Well, yeah, because in Star Trek, it's all synthetically derived.
Exactly.
I guess the question is if you know so-called lab-grown meat is 50 years off. You know.
Oh, I think it's much less than that. Like it's realistically, like as with most things, it's a regulatory and a societal hiccup. So government is woefully uneducated on most things because they have to be marginally educated on everything, right? So it makes it impossible for them to actually have a good grasp of what's going on, because they have to worry about the politics of things and the bureaucracies and all these lovely headaches. But when you look at the actual technology, the underlying technology, it is very much there. It's just a question of us applying it and then commercializing it, so making it accessible. Whereas right now, a printed steak would probably cost something along the lines of like $10,000 or something like that, I think was the last number I heard. Over time, though, that cost is going to come down. So for us to bring down a synthetic steak cost to a point of like costing $1 is definitely viable, as long as we come up with a simple way of coming up with that core material, that those cells, and driving those, which, considering cells naturally divide and procreate, as long as we can come up with vats, I guess, to manufacture these cells, then we could definitely come to a position, but we'd have to choose to do that. Like, humans would have to, at least like 20-30% of the population have to consciously be like, I'm going to direct 1% of my income towards making that a reality within the next 5 years. And then it would be completely achievable, without a doubt. Without a doubt. We'd have so much resource going into that and so many people supporting it, so you're going to have the guaranteed consumption of it. Whereas, like, even if a business were to go all the way and do that, even if they could convince investors that it's a good idea, yada, 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 the problem is they bring it to market and Whole Foods is like, no one's going to buy this, or a local grocery store is like, no one's going to buy this. If you don't have the market actually making that decision to change their behavior, the business case is not going to be there, and the technology will never be developed or implemented.
Well, and the counter lobbying. I mean, the industries that would be threatened by that. So I think there's a huge push-pull. But the big question I would ask is, I appreciate there's some health stuff that you mentioned. But I mean, if you could thrive from the dietary aspects of veganism, I mean, if you could be happy and thrive, would you?
Yes, I would switch. I personally would. If I could, yeah, I think I would switch. Like, even though there's like societal norms which would be different, like, for instance, you go to like a fancy meeting, you go to a steakhouse, right? And there are now options on the menu to have non-meat oriented dishes, even at a steakhouse. So I think, like, we are definitely making tremendous progress. I think we're getting there. I probably would, but I don't want to say necessarily that I 100% would, because I don't know. Like, I could get drunk and accidentally eat like some beef jerky or something and just not even be cognizant, right? But I think generally, like, in terms of my living standards and how much meat I consume, it would come down tremendously, like 99-point-something%. If it were pure, like, a situation where I had more energy, oh, for sure, 100% I would switch over. But with less energy, I just can't be as productive as I need to, and that is key. It's very, very important to me.
Yeah, and I mean, just a little bit about my personal experience, and I'm happy to talk more statistics as well, because I appreciate it is anecdotal. And I do want to caveat it with, I do consider it more of a bonus because it doesn't always happen. But my personal experience is I dropped loads of weight. I was competitive. Well, I have been competitive in jiu-jitsu as well as cycling, and my energy level actually skyrocketed. That's one example. It depends how you do it. But the big thing I would have, I mean, you mentioned societal norms. I mean, do you have any friends that are vegan, or were they kind of picking on you a bit when you were vegetarian / experimenting with the wider animal use and veganism?
Like, I wouldn't say I have a large group of vegan friends. Like, a lot of my friends eat meat. I would definitely say the majority of my friends eat meat. And that's just the norm, right? Like, that is, you meet someone on the street, I would say there's a very high chance of that person being a carnivore. Like, they eat whatever, it's not, I do have some friends who are vegetarian, and I have, like, met a few people who are vegan. But another issue with that is, like, this is not hating on veganism or anything like that, just to preface.
No.
But a lot of people in the community can be not the nicest people to hang around if you do not perfectly align with their way of being or thinking. Like, you are an anomaly in my experience. You're like a super cool, chill guy. You're just, like, very nice and friendly, and you're happy to educate and help people. That I would not say is the norm in the grouping that identifies around the term vegan, which is damaging towards the whole movement. Because it alienates people who are maybe not able to necessarily, like, for instance, myself, like, I feel super alienated. I'm like, and I'm often discounted in terms of, like, oh no, like, you have more energy exclusively if you go vegan. I'm like, that's definitely not the case for everyone. I know that because I tried. I'm not saying, like, it's the norm. Let nobody gets energy. I'm just saying there are definitely situations in which it is not beneficial from a health point of view for everyone.
Yeah, and thank you for that. I mean, likewise, I mean, I've been enjoying this chat too, because I know I really enjoy chats like this because I oftentimes, learn something and think about things in a new way too. I mean, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I'm going to be thinking about that tonight probably. Like,
I'm glad.
wow, there's a lot of overlap there. But yeah, I mean, I think you struck at something there, which I think is, I know it is a challenge. I know for myself, I oftentimes grapple with like, similar to you, it sounds like just all the wrongs that are happening in the world. And I think oftentimes people manufacture that in different ways and people have different kind of strategies, and we're all just humans at the end of the day trying to navigate a moral atrocity.
Yeah.
So there, I mean, that's the one caveat there, although that's kind of a blanket statement. I'm not trying to speak for all vegans or non-vegans for that matter. So, I mean, there is a free support program called Challenge 22 where you get a team of mentors. And I think we were talking about it a little bit with they love emojis too. We were talking about it just before we went live. But I think the big thing is they have a whole team of registered dietitians. So you can say stuff like, hey, what are the best things to get me thinking more about my energy levels? And I know they talk about an app called Chronometer. I'm not sure if you're familiar with.
No, I haven't. I'm going to write that down.
Yeah, I can send you this all afterwards too. I'll make a note too. But I mean, it depends like if you're detail oriented or not, but that will literally say like this is your percent of grams of carbs, fat, protein, and all this stuff for the day and where you are against your levels. So I think
that sounds interesting. That sounds super interesting.
Well, and I know for me a big thing was the big thing I think is clicking on the why, which it sounds like you have both lobster and dog experience from the past that like has connected you with our fellow animals and seen that little spark of like the kind of magic they bring to our existence, like you said, like as neighbors and friends, as you put it, which
we're not alone.
Beautiful. Well, it's true. It's true. But I mean, I think once you click on that why, the how, instead of being a barrier, it's this like whole new world to explore. So there's that side of it. And I could tell you're the type of person that like once you like put your mind to something, you can accomplish it. Like there's nothing to like, you're talking about the Woeigo project, like how many times it would have been easy for you to just throw in the towel, so to speak.
Yeah,
and you kept going with that.
Yeah, so easier. Yeah. I think as well it comes down to like the motivation of like the output of what it is, and like when it comes to a project like that, and you can see the significant changes over multiple areas of existence, that is a really nice motivator. Whereas like the diet one is also a situation where it's like, even if I do change, it's not going to cause a huge effect. I'm one person, but on the same note, it just takes one person to start something, right? And then there's a ripple effect because you impact everybody else. Like, for instance, was not even thinking about my diet in the last like 2 years. I'm like, hey, I have energy, I'm healthy, I'm good. I don't need to worry about it anymore. But now after discussing it with you and engaging with you and getting your perspective and your energy, I'm definitely now thinking about it again, which is, I guess kind of, that's the whole point, right? If we can get more people to actually think about it and actually give it the time of day when it's an uncomfortable thing to think about, it will make more progress. But until we have like all the viable alternatives really set up and operating, I don't think it will become like a norm. I think vegetarians are still going to be a minority of the population, vegans a minority of that minority. But ultimately, I think it's an inescapable future. Like, it's just not viable economically, ethically, morally to sustain ourselves as we are right now. It just doesn't work. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Oh, I think we have to constantly evolve as a species and multiple. I think we're definitely on the same page when it comes to that. But the individual side of it, to me, I think the power of the individual is, what's our population at? Approaching 8 billion now? Like, we're all in, it's made up of 8 billion individuals. So like each, like, I mean, you mentioned, someone's lifespan. I've seen, there's a whole range of estimates, but it's around 10,000 of our fellow animals that are spared over a lifetime. So literally that's enough for me. And even if it was just one individual, if I knew I could avoid them being bred for a net negative life and then being used and murdered, You know, that's
That's a good way of looking at it. Actually, that's a really, really good way of looking at it. That's like, it would definitely reduce the need for breeding into a life of suffering, 100%. Because if the revenues aren't there to support it, then the business activity will collapse. But I think, like, realistically, to actually solve this problem, it really does come down to like commercializing the alternatives, making it so if I want a steak, I get a synthetic steak. If I want whatever, I get a synthetic whatever. There's definitely going to be, or I would imagine, seeing in the marketplace a significant pushback from like people who are very, very strongly religious, because synthetic stuff like computers, electricity, all that stuff has always been historically resisted most by that group. Even though, like, over time they eventually come around. Like, you won't find many extremely religious people being like, no, the internet is Satan, I'm not touching that. A lot of them, like pastors, are on YouTube now, you know. So I think it's probably like they'll come around eventually, especially if it is all done for them. Like, humans are inherently lazy. Like, they got things to worry about, they got lives to live, so things have to be much easier for them. But if you can make it economically like, I think we need a Tesla for synthetic food.
well, I think that would go a long way. That would certainly go a long way to addressing a lot of these things. I mean, I guess when I think about like there's kind of three levels. I guess there's the synthetic things that are basically replicating, which I think you'd probably, like you say, there'd probably still be some people that are resistant, saying, "Oh, it's not the real thing." But it would certainly go a long way. There's also like the processed foods, which we already kind of have. We've already got kind of like the plant burgers and stuff. I mean,
which are pretty good,
it is more kind of, yeah. Well, and I think that's just it, because when we look at eating someone's body, like, what makes them taste good? Is it actually their body, or is it the herbs and the seasoning and the salt and the pepper and all that stuff, that the plants that we put on them? So like, I think with a bit of creativity and a bit of sense of exploration, you know, and that's kind of, I mean, I know before, you know, and this is focusing on the human-centric dietary aspect of it, but I think it is a part of the process. I ate an incredibly bland diet, and now I eat much more excitingly. My partner, I'm lovely enough, she makes some amazing vegan cheeses that would like blow your mind. She like smokes carrot, and it tastes very similar, if not the same, as like salmon would. And like just some incredible things that would, like, honestly, they'd blow my mind.
Yeah, that's super creative. I mean, that's
amazing. So there's that level that's kind of already here versus synthetic. But underneath those two layers, there's a third layer. And I think this is where, like, from a moral perspective, where I choose to focus the most is just whole foods. Like, they're already here. Like lentils, your rice, your all these things. You know, do we actually need new technologies or anything to answer the moral question? Like, I appreciate convenience-wise and replicating tastes, it would help, but like at the moment, you know, do we actually already have what we need?
I feel like I don't eat lobster very much anymore, just because of Bob the lobster. But like, I did have a lobster tail a couple months ago at my friend's restaurant, at like a whole seafood platter. And that experience was really, really nice. So I don't want to necessarily take away like the power of like meals and like breaking bread, because you go to a culture and to really understand a culture, or to like bond, like eating is a fundamentally social and human thing, right? To go and wipe out certain things completely without essentially making them almost identical is essentially destroying that element of their culture. And I think that could be highly resisted. Like, something could remind somebody of their childhood or their grandmother or whatever. So I don't want to necessarily just wipe that stuff out. I think the synthetics really do make it a perfect situation where it just becomes like it's a why not, especially if you can get the economic balance right, where it's cheaper to go with the synthetic by a tremendous margin, which makes sense because like the overall input would theoretically be much lower once you've taken care of all that R&D cost that we're currently stuck in. And you just putting cells in a vat versus growing a whole damn animal over X years, it's going to be a lot easier to do the cells in a vat for a few hours. So economically, the output should come out to a situation where the synthetic is much cheaper. And ultimately, I think that will push a lot of people forward on it. And then you have the moral argument as well. But now it's like literally just kind of like a little push versus the economic driver, which would be significant, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting because I've had a similar experience where meeting a particular species has connected me more with the broader species. I mean, I much now think about them all as individuals. I mean, do you think if you met a chicken, for instance, one of my sister's chickens that, you know, they jump into your lap or even just doing their own thing? And
You're gonna ruin that dream, my man. Don't do this.
Well, I mean, I guess that's the question. Like, at what point? I mean, I appreciate we have spent a bit of time on kind of the taste side of things, which it does kind of, you know, as been shared here, like it begs the question, like, where does taste fit into the morality of it? I mentioned the thing of, you know, the auditory, if we enjoyed hearing sounds or even seeing something, would that justify it? So why is taste this like supreme moral trump card, as it were? I guess is the question, interesting one.
I think my argument for that, which could be completely wrong, so this is just like my attempt. I think the argument against, like, for taste, essentially, like, taste is like you get a craving for a particular thing that your body needs or wants. Like, for instance, when you're really thirsty, water tastes like sweet. You know, when you really need to consume a particular thing, the flavor of that thing becomes much, much more appealing. So I think that's kind of where flavor comes from. For instance, like, a lot of people are anemic, and a common solution to that is just like eat more red meats, right? Even though they're not the perfect source of iron, there's much better sources of iron out there, especially from plants and grains. But the association in the brain for that flavor combination, it can be quite significant. And also just the variation of flavors as well, and textures and things like that. I think eating is I want to say, like, cathartic kind of experience, which can be incredibly comforting. That's why people sometimes eat exclusively for comfort, right? And they can binge eat just as an addiction to make themselves self-soothe. So I think that's kind of where flavor fits, whereas, like, you don't have that same intensity with, like, I guess you do crave listening to a song sometimes, but I don't know if it's on the same level. At least I wouldn't say in my subjective experience it's been on the same level. What do you think? Like, do you kind of see where I'm coming from?
I do. I mean, I appreciate we're kind of geographically we're on different sides of the marble, so we're in different the marble floating around the universe. But I mean, looking at the dietetics associations is a big thing for me, that there's no, like, at any stage of life, the US, the UK, I'm not sure actually on Canada's stance, I'd have to look into that there's no biological requirement at any stage of life. I mean, I love how you pointed out how the plant sources of iron, because you know, you saved me from making the same point. Because yeah, like, getting into the heme versus non-heme, and yeah.
But there's also I remember reading something about actually the state of like the complementary components. So, like, for instance, to absorb some things, like, let's say fat soluble vitamins, because that's, I think, what I read about. There are particular other elements or fats that you can get from, like, say, seafood. So, like, omega-3s, actually, I think was the exact study I was reading about. Like, you absorb them better if you have these complementary components with it, and then it goes into your system more easily. I think vitamin D is also something associated with that. And by consuming, like, say, a steak, you're getting all these complementary components potentially. But again, like, that's solved by synthetics. So
you're talking about a future synthetic that was drawn up in this, not currently.
I'm thinking, so I'm drawing from a research paper which is talking about just the nature of how we absorb nutrients, and then I'm pretty sure it was specifically talking about omega-3s, and then I was just going into how having certain complementary components out of seafood made omega-3s more effective. So even if you had a lower consumption of omega-3s, your body could utilize them more effectively. So actually, you know what? I can probably try and find this, actually. Let me see here.
Yeah, because I guess the thing for me is, like, when we're looking at a fish, you know, where do they get their nutrients? Because when we're looking at nutrients, animals don't necessarily produce nutrients. They're filtering from plants.
Right. Well, we also they will produce. Let's say it eats plankton, or something of that nature, right? Its body processing that input will often create other things inside of its organs in order to help it process that and derive all the nutrients and energy that it needs to sustain itself. So there is something going on there, for sure. I just don't know if we fully understand it. Like, I know I don't.
I guess looking at fish, I mean, the biggest thing is algae or algae, depending on where we're
speaking from.
Are, but yeah, exactly. But I mean, like, I mean, some of the other things for because I reference this for myself, like omega fatty acids, pumpkin seeds, hemp seeds, flax seed, chia seed, and so on. I mean, they're like tofu, soybeans, walnuts, like they all have omega fatty acids. So nutrition's not like super simple. I'm not trying to like brush over it with like, just eat some plants and you'll be all right. I think we should still be mindful, but I think that goes for all of us because there's plenty of unhealthy, non-vegans too.
Oh yeah, I'd say more so.
That is focusing on the dietary, thing. It sounds like you're kind of keen to give it a bit of a exploration, because if you could do it, that would certainly change or it sounds like it might change your perspective on the matter if it wasn't seen as a necessity.
Essentially, if I didn't have to spend time or resources to change my current position, so I could continue to contribute maximally to my work, because that is ultimately my driver. Like, I don't mind working 3 days straight, 70 plus hours straight. But I need the energy to do that, and I get there thanks to what I intake, right? So I also resources, right? Like, if I spend $10, that's $10 less that I have to invest into things. So every single penny counts, every single second counts, and my energy and intensity in those moments is very important as well. So I know there are some people who are much more productive and efficient on vegan diets, and as a consequence, even if it does economically cost them a little bit more, which on average I think it probably doesn't, as long as they have the right kind of, because for instance, going back to grains, I think that are the cheapest food staple that you can get.
You're stealing my lines again. I'm just kidding. Steal away. It depends how you do it, doesn't it? I mean, if you're going in and you're going to if we're going to the freezer aisle and buying like the processed plant food or animal-free food, that's going to have a higher cost than your grains, like you talk about, or versus buying raspberries versus bananas. There's all kinds of spectrum there, isn't there?
That makes a lot of sense. It also depends on where you are. Like, I know locally in Canada here, like a lot of our berries are cheap because it's like, I think blueberries are one of our biggest exports or something like that. I was like, what the heck?
You're already set up then.
Yeah.
Antioxidants galore for you.
I'll turn to a Smurf though if I eat blueberries. But yeah, I feel like a large part of it is also cultural too. Like, if I'm going into a meeting or something like that, I have had to learn socialization a little bit different from normal people. And I know, like, on a subconscious level, if you don't have a drink with someone, because I quit alcohol for a period of time, like, there's huge negative repercussions. I've lost a lot of client work because I made a switch from like I was drinking to when I wasn't drinking. And simply on a subconscious level, people are like, oh, I just don't trust you as much as I used to. And I had like one Thai guy who was just straight to my face, and he's like, you're not drinking with me, I can't trust you anymore. I'm like, what? I was like, all of a sudden it clicked in my head. I'm like, oh my God, that's what all these other things have been related to. And I feel like breaking bread is a deeply cultural and social thing. So like, if I were to go into a meeting and not have a meal that is related to them, if I'm too different, that can, on a subconscious level, impact people in their decision making, where they just don't feel right about me anymore. And that can have huge ramifications. So at this point, like, I think we're still a little ways away in the social terms. And I think that's probably why I didn't really consider synthetics so strongly, to be entirely honest with you, prior to our conversation. And it's just like, now that I'm thinking about this problem and I'm giving it my attention and energy, that is seeming more and more to me like this holy grail. We have to reach this point. I think it is inescapable fundamentally, and I've felt that way since I first heard about synthetic meats and foods. Because it also just comes down to the reality of, like, if we're going to feed 12 billion people,
There's a lot of resources that go into that, and if we can get the synthetics down, like I've also heard about bugs and stuff. Like, where do you ethically sit on eating, like, I don't know, cockroach flour? If you don't mind me asking. Like, have you heard about all this stuff? Like, we have all these like bug derivative things now for food.
I'll confess I haven't done the due diligence on cockroach flour. That's a new one to me. I mean, I think oftentimes I do hear insects come up though as like a instead of plants, what about this type of solution thing, in quotes. I guess to me, I would like to give them the benefit of the doubt, absent information to do otherwise. So if we're looking,
like
I mean,
sentient?
I personally don't really gravitate towards the term sentient because I think for me, like before I was vegan, I'd never heard the word, and I suspect a lot of other people who aren't vegan would probably be in a similar camp. Plus, I think a big thing of it is like, how do we know if a species is sentient? So we're already removing the individuality. We're like grouping individuals by species. But
That's
then
right.
how do we confirm this? We test on each species individually, and it's like, okay, this species gets the sentience tick mark.
Not even
And it's
humans
like, how many
all
species
the
are
time.
there? It's like, so I prefer just to focus on the group of all animals. And then if someone was to suggest breeding, using, or killing them, I think it's kind of on them to make a case for why that's morally okay versus, you know, just giving them the benefit of the doubt, looking at the flip side of it.
I think that does make sense. I think that really, this all really comes down to as well as like, we have the luxury of actually choosing what we eat now, and like we haven't really come out of that inherited state where it's like you go back, I'd say even a century, food was actually a concern. Whereas like, yo, people are hungry a lot, and we've only really just begun to come out of that state of like, hey, you know what? We have a state of technology in society today where nobody ever needs to go hungry. People do because of poor economic and governmental management, but that is a separate problem. It's no longer a situation of like, oh, we can't feed everyone. That's not the problem. We're at the point where we can feed everybody in a completely morally and economically and environmentally sustainable way. It's just a matter of us making that decision at a high level and having people on board with it. And it doesn't have to be a large portion of the population. It can be a very tiny portion of the population to start to justify the entire build out, right? And I'm not big on forcing people to do anything either, but I think if you incentivize stuff by just doing it properly, people will naturally switch. That's why I think electric cars in the modern environment are probably inevitable over the next like 20 years. I think it'll be rare to see a gas car if it's not a collector's item.
That'd be interesting. Well, I mean, when we talk about like not forcing people to do things, I would agree. I think the thing I would add to that though is, don't you think that should include our fellow animals? Because aren't we forcing them to do something when we're breeding them into existence to be used and then killed?
Yes, but that is requiring a certain level of moral education, which a lot of people just haven't gone through, right? Like if you think about it, like there were in times past states of humanity where humans did not view other humans as sentient or anything of that nature, right? Which is a really good argument that I've seen from the vegan side, which is very convincing. Which is like we just haven't reached that point yet. So that I've personally changed my beliefs to that kind of situation. So I think, yeah, no, it is definitely a situation where we're impeding on the rights of others to supersede our rights because we are top of the food chain, right? So just
well, yeah, I mean, I guess with the food chain thing, I guess that's the question. You know, just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do it.
yes. But again, like I want to emphasize that prior state of like, we used to go hungry a lot and we've only just kind of come out of that. Like that's like, I'm blessed to be born in a time where like in my entire life, I've never really known hunger. Like my parents were really, really great. They'd work themselves to death to provide for me and my brother. Right. So this is a golden era of humanity. I think it should be getting better as long as we don't destroy ourselves over ego or something stupid. And I think like, yeah, ultimately if you were to have children discuss or think about this, their natural conclusion is going to be, that's not right. That's messed up. That's wrong. So
Yeah.
Yeah. I think
And I guess the question is, why not pull it forward a generation? Why save it for our children? You know?
that human nature, maybe. Like
Yeah.
humans are tricky. Once they've got a learned behavior, to change a learned behavior is much, much harder than to develop that behavior in the first place. I think, my experience at least, I think that's a relatively true statement.
Yeah, and I think just talking about like the broader issues in the world with the starvation side of things. I mean, do you think if we had more humans who were respectful of our fellow animals, specifically through veganism, that would make us better equipped to deal with some of those concerns and being more aware of the starving, children or whoever?
I think so entirely, because like it creates a more moral framework, and it encourages more of a moral framework in the mind and the way that a person views the world, where people are actually thinking about things. But on the same note, like a lot of people are just going through life right now as like automatons. They're not thinking about things. They don't have the time or energy to think about things. When they finally are not busy doing a mildly economic productive activity, because we're currently in a state where people are justifying things based on jobs, like, oh yeah, if you're busy, you're being productive, which is not true. You can be very, very busy and get absolutely nothing done. And our society is currently built on that, where it's much more about keeping people busy than actually making things happen and getting things done. So like if we fix that problem, then people have the time to think, and if people have the time to think, then they have the time to deal with morality. And when they have the time to deal with morality in the modern era and the modern state of the world, I think people naturally come to the conclusion that, like, hey, you know what? Suffering's not cool. I don't like suffering. I don't think my dog likes suffering. I don't think any animals like suffering. Like, we have the capacity and the potential to be like shepherds of life. We can take life and take care of it on our planet and improve the state of life and protect it from the harshness of nature, which we do in some cases. Like, we do that with our pets, right? Like, we protect them from reality. And I think that's a beautiful potential in humans that we can aspire towards and we can realize. We just don't. And I think it would be very hard to talk to someone who's like homeless, for instance, and be like, hey, you should not eat meat and you should deal with these moral quandaries, because they're going to look at you and be like, man, I don't choose where I eat. If I'm eating, I'm happy. Well, they got other problems to deal with. And I think all the problems are kind of interconnected. So as we kind of go through them, like if we deal with the synthetic food problem first, we provide that economic change. Well, one, that's a lot of legitimate jobs. Those are actually productive jobs. You don't have someone like checking people out in a grocery store, which is completely useless now that we have fully autonomous checkouts, which are still actually like underdeveloped. So yeah, I think it's all interconnected and would help tremendously. Like, we can help people a little bit more on the economic side, get more of the education going, and then I think you're right. I think people would definitely abandon eating animals very quickly.
Well, I think there's some animal advocates who are kind of trying to bridge that entanglement, as it were, between those two issues. I mean, feeding animal-free food to homeless, like, that's one way that you're actually helping to feed them and helping to address that, as well as, obviously trying to answer the moral question of not, feeding animals as well. So
I like that. That's a good idea. That person's on it. I like it.
Yeah, I can link you to Seb Alex runs an animal rights center, actually, Lebanon, that like thousands of meals. There's a lot that went into that too. That's probably a lot to get into today, but that's where these initiatives, similar to your Woeigo stuff, like, you can actually bring people together. Like, oh, we want to combat hunger, we want to combat, animal use, and it's like, actually our objectives align.
Yes, I think that's.
But you're right. Having the time to do it, because if someone's living week to week on their paycheck, it's difficult to do that. Which actually, real quick, you mentioned the time side of things. I mean, for yourself, because obviously that loops into all this. Like, for me, it was the first shop, like going around the shop and just actually checking what is and isn't animal free. After that, it's not that different in my experience. I actually find it save a lot of time because I use the microwave a whole heck of a lot less. So instead of like chucking stuff on a plate, 5 minutes in the microwave, eat it, I literally, a lot of stuff you can just eat straight away. If you're talking about bananas, for instance.
Yeah. You get
so you might find it saves you time.
Maybe, but then I also have to invest the time to actually educate myself and make that change. Which realistically, there is no real excuse. But on the same note, like there's just some things which taste really good too, and I don't have an alternative to that tasty thing. So I guess it is selfish, but in that selfishness, it allows me to kind of replenish and recuperate. Because like, let's say I do something for me that makes me feel good and makes me happy and whatever, like that boosts my energy battery, my willpower, so to speak, which allows me to deal with more challenging things where I don't want to do what I'm doing, or like something's challenging or difficult. And if I'm in a higher state of energy and willpower, then I can handle that barrier, that problem, that hurdle. But if I'm in a situation where I've exhausted myself on all these other things, nope, I'm not going to do that thing that I need to do.
Yeah.
So,
well, I appreciate the honesty and transparency there, because that's, I mean, I think for people who do live vegan, I think we've probably all approached it from a different angle. I mean, you mentioned kind of work situations. I'm self-employed, so it's less of a factor for me, but my partner works. I mean, I appreciate in the apocalypse, the whole office situation. It's a lot different now. It's more concerned about whether our mics are turned on or not. But prior to that, though, I mean, there's a lot, and this is where that Challenge 22 group, I think, could really come in handy, because they can say, like, other people who are doing the similar thing can say, actually, this is something that really helped me. I mean, I know one thing she does is knowing where they're going ahead of time. You can already know what the options are. So that way, when it comes to ordering, most places have a so-called vegan option now, as it were. So that makes that hurdle, once you connect it on the why of answering the moral kind of question of animal use, it makes it a lot more approachable. I know, at least for her. So there's a lot around this, though, and I appreciate it's a lot to unpack. You know, I appreciate we've dabbled into a lot of this, and I am conscious of the time. I don't want to keep you for too long. I don't know what else you have going on there today, but
thank you, Jeremy. Yeah, I think realistically, like, just to kind of move towards wrapping it up, I think, first of all, I think what you're doing in your approach is amazing. I really, really, really appreciate it. I think that is exactly what humanity really needs in order to be able to handle this problem, because coming at it from a perspective of like, hey, like, friendly, have you thought about this? Here's some more information for you. Paired with kind of a solution methodology of like, hey, like you mentioned this problem, here's a way around that problem, is really, 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 really awesome. I might try veganism. I don't want to commit to it because I just don't want to commit to something. But I think what I will do is, as like an ode to you, as a thanks to you, I will definitely put effort into shifting my consumption and looking more seriously at veganism again. And I will look at the resources you've mentioned, because I think some of those resources will help me understand a lot more and will cut my research time down tremendously. So I will look into those, and I can also just keep you posted. I'll let you know, like, if I run into issues where I'm on this journey and I'm like, oh, this is a pain in the ass, I'll let you know. I'll be like, hey, this is going to be a hiccup point for somebody. This is going to be where some people fall off. And at least then we can better understand it. I think that might be beneficial or helpful in some way. I hope.
Sounds awesome, mate. Honestly, it's really nice to talk to someone that's so open-minded about this. I know it helps reinstill hope for me too. So it's really been a nice exchange with you. I appreciate there's a lot to unpack.
There is, yeah.
In a short space of time. I think we had a good crack at it. But yeah, I'll be catching up on the comments to see if there's anything else. But it's, I guess, just for my end closing remarks, like, absolutely, like, anytime, mate, just like feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to I mean, there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. Like, a lot of the stuff you're talking about, like, everyone's challenges are unique, but there's also some commonality, and just knowing you're not kind of alone in that. But I would just encourage you to think about Bob the lobster and the dog friends and other fellow animals you've connected with in your life. And if that's just one glimmer of the other animals who are, you know, used in some way for you, then hopefully that can help give you the so-called why power to kind of figure out some of these things.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, as I said, you can like your Woeigo story. Like you've already overcome more than a lot of people would, I think, in that scenario. So it's really just kind of maybe this could be a part of a new passion. Who knows?
Potentially, I think so. I think I think you're right. I just want to be careful not to overextend myself as well, because like I do have things I need to do, right? But on the same note, like I feel like this is one of those things where if I can just focus on it right now, just maybe put a little bit of effort in right now, make that change now, the ramifications, as you said, just for my own consumption could be significant. Could be really, really, really significant.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a beautiful place to leave it right there. So I think thank you everybody for joining us. Like I say, I do want to catch up on this because I have been focused on the conversation. I want to catch up on all the comments.
For sure.
If you do want to join, anyone who's watching wants to join in the future, don't forget to hit that funny little subscribe button. It does make a big difference because this is a small channel, so every little bit does really help with that. But the big thing is if you do want to come and have a chat, if there's anything you think I missed or something you want to build on, and this goes to you too, Chris. You're always welcome back. We might sit there thinking and like, I really want to talk to you about the dolphin communication, maybe. So maybe we do that in the future.
I'll find that research. I'll send it to you.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. But yeah, drop me a message. And I know Vegan Vacancy was on here earlier. We are in the process of setting up a chat as well. Yeah, to hope to do more of these because I think when we can bring, as the originator of Animal Rights said, Tom Reagan, when we can bring people together of goodwill, we can help to navigate some of these complex issues. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining. I'll see you backstage here in a moment. Chris, just to give you another quick personal thank you. And I'm not sure when my next live stream is going to be. That'll be to come, but whatever it is, we'll see you in the next video. Thanks, everyone.
See you guys.
To be a guest on my next live stream, email me at veganinteractions@gmail.com or message me on Facebook. We can explore animal advocacy strategies, or I'm happy to respond to questions about veganism too. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.